faith is like Wi-Fi. So it's invisible, you can't see it, you can't feel it, you can't hear it, but it still has the power to connect you to what you need.
I think that a lot of people have a very hard time understanding doubt
Right.
and navigating when those feelings occur for them.
Those that live by faith, it consumes their whole life, and you can tell by their lifestyle, maybe their actions, their everyday thoughts, how they treat people. Welcome everyone back to another episode of Beyond the Lesson, a Narrow Way podcast, where we take a weekly Bible school topic and have authentic conversations, reflective questions, all to help you build your faith. I'm so excited to have you join us today. I'm your host, Brayden Bazinet, and today I have here with me Miguel. Miguel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Of course. Today we're going to be talking about faith. We're going to look at what is real and strong faith. We're going to look at how to handle doubt and unbelief, and then end with what it means to have faith in Jesus. So a really exciting topic we're going to get to talk about today. But before we jump into that, do you want to just open us up with a word of prayer?
Sweet. So, dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you that is your Sabbath, Lord. We ask that you grant us rest today, but specifically today, allow Brayden and I to really get deep into your word, Lord. Allow us to speak authentically from our faith and have the folks listening just really close to our lesson today. And thank you, Lord, again, that we are able to rest. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Awesome. All right. Well, let's jump right into our kind of first question here. We're going to look at what does it mean to have faith in real life? And what do you think makes faith real instead of just an idea that Christians talk about?
So I think that for me personally, I understand faith in two ways. First, there is faith that you have just interpersonally. So you have faith in God, and that's the relationship that we explore. But you have faith for a lot of other things as well. And it's important to know sort of the distinction between those things in my eyes. For example, if you're waiting for the bus, you have faith that the bus driver will arrive.
Yep.
And I think that for a lot of people who are questioning what faith means to them, it's a useful starting point to begin from. And it's sort of that trust and hope that you employ onto other people, and the ultimate trust and hope that you employ into God.
Right. Yeah, I love the bus example. I actually have kind of a same. I have here that faith is like Wi-Fi. So it's invisible. You can't see it. You can't feel it. You can't hear it. But it still has the power to connect you to what you need. And that's exactly what faith does for us as well. It connects us to what we need, God. And without faith, there'd be no relationship with God. Now, Hebrews 11:1 says, "Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see." So again, it's really just having that faith in, something of the unknown, right? But we know it's going to happen at the end of the day. Like you said, like standing for the bus waiting, the bus is going to come. You might not know when. It might be late. It might be early, but it's still going to come. Do you have anything for, how does faith become real?
Yeah, I think when it comes specifically to our faith in God, I think that for a lot of people, they start from sort of there's always a before point. For example, like I grew up actually Catholic.
Okay.
And throughout the course of my walk with God, it's led me to meeting Brielle and also my fiance, and also coming to church now and learning God through Adventism. And I think that it becomes real for someone when they understand their role in nurturing that faith. I spoke a little bit about trust earlier, and I think that in the same way, bus driver is a funny example. In the same way that you learn over time to trust a bus driver, you learn over time that God has a plan for you. And that comes with good and that comes with bad. And your perception might not necessarily reflect that plan or the greater meaning of that plan.
Right.
But it begins with that trust.
Yeah.
And nurtured that way.
Yeah, it does. It comes when it moves. It comes real, I think, when it moves from like that theoretical what faith is to actually fully trusting and putting it into practice. I think that's where faith becomes real. And when you do that, it shapes your decisions, it shapes your reactions, your hope, kind of just shapes, overall how you're going to live your life, right? So, maybe you're going to pray and you're going to feel nothing at first when you pray, but then when you obey, even if maybe it costs you something, maybe it's, you're putting your finances, even though you might not make it this month, you're going to still trust in tithing maybe, or, you're still going to go ahead and you feel like, God's calling you to do this. You're still going to go ahead and do it, even though you might not think it's going to work out. When you start putting your trust in God's character, your circumstance starts to change and it starts to help you. And, just for some of those thinking, oh, well, how does faith grow? And we'll get into more of this later, but, there's the biblical example of faith like a mustard seed, right? And a mustard seed, a seed needs to grow. So as you plant it, it grows and, you nourish it and eventually it becomes a tree. It's the same thing for our faith. It's not a quick process, but it's a very slow nurturing process as well.
Right.
All right. Let's move on. Why do you think people still ask God for signs today, even though we have so much evidence of his faithfulness already?
It's a loaded question in the fact that I think we are often bombarded with a lot of different things that can appear like the truth.
Yep.
I think when I think about God, it's synonymous with the truth for me.
Okay.
And I think if you don't lead a life that aligns itself to truth, you will find truth and seek truth in places that it doesn't exist.
Okay.
And I think that's for a lot of reason why when people in general are confronted with matters of faith, questions of faith, and they look out elsewhere for those answers, they'll interpret what they think are signs of truth, right? And this is it's a bit of an abstract concept, right? But it's in the same way, like maybe it rains for a week straight, and you notice that it's raining, and every time you look outside, you see like the same kid running around. And eventually, over time, if you don't understand the weather, you don't try to understand it, you assume that that kid is causing the rain.
Right.
Now, that sounds like a very comical thing.
Yeah.
But in a way, I think that's how a lot of people approach understanding truth. They might see things that they associate with their circumstances. Like, I have a bad day, it has to be this.
Yep.
I have a good day, it has to be this.
Yep.
But there is no real truth other than God. And I think when we don't acknowledge that, when we don't come to it, then we're looking for signs always.
Right. Yeah, and the whole, not understanding and just thinking maybe it's luck or this thing that's causing it. I mean, we still see that so much today, right? I mean, sports in general, right? I'm a big hockey guy, and the playoffs here were just recently, and, Connor McDavid, if he won that game, he's showing up in the exact same outfit the next day, right? Thinking that, okay, maybe this outfit's giving us good luck, right? So again, signs are nothing new, and if we look in the Bible, they're not new there either. Gideon asked for a sign to confirm to march into war. We have Moses asking for a sign about leading Israel. We have King Hezekiah asking for a sign to prove that God would heal him, right? So signs are nothing new. But I think, as us as people, it kind of shows how much faith do we have, right? When we have something that's maybe a little bit uncertain because we can't see it, we want to get that real certainty, and that's where we start asking for signs, because we can't see or touch necessarily faith at this moment.
I love to add to that.
Yeah, go
too.
ahead.
It's when you talk about look like the I had a good point. Let me jog my memory here. You spoke about signs. You spoke about So I think it's a very natural thing as well. It's something that I want to acknowledge too, is that when we see people who look for truth elsewhere, sometimes we're pretty quick. I say we as myself as a Christian, I tend to be I err on the side of judgment more than I should.
Sure.
That's a thing that I have to contend with. And I think that when we see other people, or even in our own walk, us looking for something tangible, I think that it is a very natural response to a fear or a doubt that we might have. But I think that it's like you said, it's that faith that brings us back to seeking what truth actually is.
Yeah. And I don't, this raises a different question of, are asking for signs bad, right? Mark 8:11-12, and this gets brought up a lot when people talk about asking for signs. It reads, "The Pharisees came and began to question Jesus. To test him, they asked him for a sign from heaven. He sighed deeply and said, 'Why does this generation ask for a sign? Truly I tell you, no sign will be given to it.'" And when we read that, people are like, "Oh, Jesus hates us asking for signs. We can't ask for signs." And I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with asking for signs. But in this situation, the people are asking, in this, they kind of knew the Old Testament, right? Like, it's not like they didn't know, they didn't have any context from before.
Right.
And it's not like they had no knowledge of God either. Yet they're still questioning Jesus like they knew nothing. And I think that's where the context comes into play in this situation. And that's why Jesus is sighing deeply in that text, because he already, they already had more than enough evidence to have faith in God. They didn't need more evidence. And I think that's where, when we think, are we asking for a sign, we need to ask ourselves, are we asking for a sign because of our lack of faith, or are we asking for a sign because we just truly don't understand? And I think that's where, maybe we're over asking or under asking, right? And, a great example of that is Israel. If we think of everything Israel saw, they saw the parting of the Red Sea, they saw manna fall from heaven, they saw water come from a rock, but yet they still had doubt, and they probably kept asking out of anyone for the most signs, right? And I think in that case, it comes to a point of, okay, you've seen so much, no matter what more sign God gives to you, it's not going to help you believe anymore, right? You already have had more than enough to believe. Now you need to start building your faith, and I think that's where it comes into play. All right, let's move on and look a little bit at Jesus seeing our faith. So what does it mean that Jesus notices the quality of our faith, and how does that challenge the way we approach him when we are struggling with doubt?
I think that quality of your faith is something that is a very personal experience with your faith. I think that, and the way that I would come to understand it is, as you progress in your age and your walk with God, you know that at certain points you felt your faith more, felt your faith stronger, whether it's circumstance or what have you. But I think that how you come to know the quality of your faith is the habitual practice of coming back and trying to understand the questions that you have through God and through the lens that Jesus wants you to have. I think it's littered throughout the New Testament on how Jesus teaches us to live, and the bedrock of his principles, his moral principles, is the expression of faith. And for him, it's the faith to his Father. And all of the works of Jesus, he is first coming back to his Father. Everything is led towards his Father. And I think for us, we don't have necessarily that direct connection the way that Jesus did.
Right.
But we can feel when we act in a way like him. And it's as simple as showing empathy to people.
Right.
And when you feel yourself doing that in a true sense, it brings the same emotions, at least to me, on things that nourish my faith. And I think that's in my mind how Jesus notices me. Right? Like I act more like him, or I can try to act more like him. And I think those moments of doubt is when I fail.
Right.
But it has nothing to do with Jesus.
Right.
It has everything to do with me.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and Jesus is a perfect example of like what faith should look like, right? And he did it perfectly, and he did it here on earth. So it gives us something that we can look towards and achieve towards. And I think just because we call ourselves a follower of Jesus, that doesn't automatically mean we have strong faith. Like I think sometimes people say, okay, I'm a Christian. Yeah, of course I have strong faith. But even though lots of Christians claim to have strong faith, then when it actually comes and they need it, you see that, or they realize that they're nowhere close, right? So even for, like you yourself, you might be like, oh yeah, my faith is strong. And then all of a sudden, God throws a trial my way, right? And in the middle of the trial, all of a sudden now we're asking for all these signs, and we're saying, I don't know, I don't know how we're going to get out of this situation. And now you're having all these feelings of doubt. And, when I look back at maybe a trial that I had and I look back at how I handled that, it makes me think, oh yeah, you know what, maybe in that sense, my faith wasn't very strong, right? But the great thing about that is also trials come into our life to help us build our faith. And God puts them there on purpose to help us build our faith. And now if you can look back and analyze those past situations that you had, you can take that and look, okay, yeah, I need to work on this, or I need to work on this, right? And then help build our faith that way. So, thinking about the last half of that question, how does that challenge the way we approach it when we're struggling with doubt? I want to use Mark 9:14-19 as just a perfect example. So it says, and I won't read it, but basically we see a man, he brings his possessed son to Jesus. And at first, he says his disciples could not cast out the spirit. So already we're seeing that he's showing doubt about it. But then says if Jesus can do anything, and have pity and help him. And verse 23-24 is where we see a perfect response, and it says, "If you can," said Jesus, "everything is possible for one who believes." Immediately the boy's father claimed, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." And Jesus honors it and heals the boy. And I think that's a perfect picture of faith, because the man he's struggling at first, right? And he's having a hard time believing. And I think we have that a lot of times as well, especially with something that we can't see and touch. And I think that's really hard for us as humans to comprehend sometimes. And sometimes we do struggle, and a situation may overwhelm us. But then, Jesus comes back and says, "If I can," right? And he says, we don't need to doubt him. And at that point, that's where we have a decision. Are we going to trust him, or are we going to continue to doubt him?
Right.
And that's where either our faith builds or our faith fails. All right. Let's go on to, talking maybe about faith and how it's maybe not just a feeling. So how do we keep trusting God when our feelings don't line up with our faith? And is our faith based on our feelings or our decisions?
So I kind of alluded a little bit to, I spoke a little bit about habits. And I think that faith isn't just your thoughts or your actions or your feelings or your actions. I think that faith is like a perfect alignment of the two.
Right.
And sometimes you have one and not the other.
Right.
And I think that when we first enter our walk with God, when you first learn who Jesus is and you decide that you want to follow him, you start in one of either category of enthusiasm. In either my thoughts and my actions align, I'm trying to perfect that, or my thoughts and my feelings align, I'm trying to perfect the way that I act. Or my actions may be aligned, but I don't prescribe these things to God or think of these things as blessings from God. And I think that regardless of where you're more inclined naturally when you begin your walk, I think that the act of building your faith comes at merging those two together, so that you know that your intentions are strong and your decisions are aligned with the way that you believe.
Yeah. I know. I love that. And I have here, faith is a decision long before it becomes a feeling. So I think at first you need to decide you want to have faith, and then it moves on from there, right? Ellen G. White, in her early writings from page 72, it states, "Many do not exercise that faith which it is their privilege and duty to exercise, often waiting for that feeling which faith alone can bring. Feeling is not faith. Faith is ours to exercise, but joyful feeling and the blessing are God's to give." So as you said, it is a combined of both. But I think at first we need to make that decision to have faith. And the more faith we have in Jesus, the more God gives us that feeling of being close to him. And that's how the two come intertwined together. All right. Do you have maybe anything for how do we keep trusting God when our feelings don't line up with our faith?
Yeah, I think, so sort of calling back to our earlier discussion about doubt, I think that a lot of people have a very hard time understanding doubt and navigating when those feelings occur for them.
Okay.
And I think, again, it's a very personal thing. There are some people who will look at the state of the world that will cause some doubt.
Yep.
And maybe there are some that it's not their priority and their household is a priority.
Right.
And maybe when there's infighting, there's family issues, that causes doubt. But I think that, like I've spoken a bit about how those issues are your own, but they're not Jesus' issues.
Right.
I think that when it comes to overcoming that sense of doubt, you throughout your walk with God ought to learn about how you yourself need to turn to him and how that occurs for you. And again, the Bible's full of answers.
Yeah.
And it's a matter of, are you open to learning where you yourself have I don't want to say issues, I don't want to say holes, but we are all imperfect without Jesus.
We are.
And I think that if we don't know that for ourselves, within those feelings of doubt, then we're never going to be able to overcome them in this life.
Yeah, and I mean, our relationship with God, it is like a spiritual, it's kind of like a wave, right? Like, I mean, it should, if you look at it in a long run, it should be doing this over time. But it's still an emotional wave of ups and downs, right? And that's just because because of sin, we're going to have trials in our life all the time. And I think Ephesians 2:8, it gives us a good reminder that faith is a response to God's grace, and it's not an emotional high. So it says, "For it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God. So, feelings should never dominate our religious experience or our relationship with God. As long as we're keeping our eyes fixed on Jesus, and not just our feelings, like, okay, today I'm not really feeling close to God. Oh, he must not be there for me. That's not what it is, right? It's
Right.
not an emotional high all the time. We're going to have those ups and downs. But as long as we keep our eyes focused and pointed towards Jesus, we'll continue working towards him and, return to feeling that closeness with him. And if we look in the Bible, there are tons of, characters and whatnot that felt distant from God at certain times, right?
Right.
But they kept focus on God, and that returns to them, right? I mean, a perfect example I can think of is King David, right? When he messes up with Bathsheba, and he feels distant from God at that time, but yet he asks for forgiveness and returns to God later on, right? All right, let's move on. The Bible gives us some great examples when we look at faith. And when we look at those examples, what do you think separates people who talk about faith compared to those who actually live by faith?
I think that you learn what separates people who talk about faith and act on their faith based on, for me, how they treat other people.
Sure.
I think that God calls on you to love your neighbor, and it's not just one of his laws as well. You ought to treat people well,
Yeah.
and that feels like something that should come naturally, but it doesn't for a lot of people. And I think that even people who would claim that they are full of faith, that their faith never wavers, but when it comes to treating people well that they might not know or they might disagree with, again, it's sort of what I've spoken to earlier about judgments.
Yeah.
And for me, sometimes I recognize in myself that I tend to be a bit judgmental. And I think that as someone who talks about their faith and claims to be a faithful person, I know that I stand to treat people better. And I stand to abide by the commandments better. So a little addendum to what I said, it's how you treat people, but it's also how you ascribe yourself to the laws that we were given.
Sure. Yeah, and I think you nailed it right there, right? Like those that live by faith, it consumes their whole life, and you can tell by their lifestyle, maybe their actions, their everyday thoughts, how they treat people. You can tell that they're living by faith just because they're consumed by that faith and that close relationship with God. And Hebrews 11 gives us a whole list of people who have lived by faith. And the common kind of thread in Hebrews 11 is that they acted on what God said even when they couldn't see the outcome. So I have some of the examples here. We got that, Abel through faith brought God a better offering than Cain. We have by faith Enoch was taken from his life so that he did not experience death, and he pleased God with his faith. We have that Noah built an ark when it rained. Didn't even know what rain was at that time, but he relied on his faith. We have Abraham. He left home without knowing where he was going. Also, if we look at Abraham, we got when he was tested with Isaac and his son offered up as an offering. There's also Jacob and Esau in their future. There's also Sarah herself with not knowing if she could bear children. We have Moses. We have Israel. There's Rahab with not being killed. So Hebrews 11 lists all these people. But, when we look at it, really, people who live by faith move on God's promises, knowing that God and that living strong in their relationship with him requires that faith. And by having it, you're going to be able to continue to move forward, right? All right. Let's move on. What does it look like to have the faith of Jesus in our daily lives, not just believing in him, but believing like him?
Yeah, I think again, it sort of ties into what I've been painting here, but I think we are all our ultimate example on how to conduct ourselves in this life is Jesus, and I think that the closer we can come to emulating him in the ways that we conduct ourselves, again, personally, interpersonally, conduct ourselves in our own minds. I think that's how we become closer and closer to him. And it's definitely not as straightforward as that though, because unlike people in the New Testament, we don't have the luxury of being able to throw ourselves at Jesus or see him. And sort of to the point that we discussed earlier, it's harder when you don't have something you can touch and feel.
Yeah.
But it's important to know that the principles that we have that were given to us uh, does lead us towards goodness and that capital T truth that we all seek and yearn for. And that's the only thing that will really silence that fear and that doubt that you experience when you lack those things.
Yeah. Yeah, and as you said, as we said before, Jesus is a perfect example of faith, right? And I don't think anyone will ever have as strong a faith as Jesus is, just because of how closely connected and how sin creates that barrier for
Mm-hmm.
us. But Revelation 14:12 says, "This calls for patient endurance on the part of the people of God who keep his commands and remain faithful to Jesus." And in this verse, God's describing end time people as those who just keep the commandments of God and have faith in Jesus. And it means more than just believing in him. It means sharing the same kind of trust Jesus had in his Father as well. It's actually interesting. In Ellen G. White, in Selected Messages, Book 3, page 172, she says, "The commandments of God have been proclaimed, but the faith of Jesus Christ has not been proclaimed by Seventh-day Adventists as the equal importance, the law and the gospel going hand in hand." And I really like that end part of the law and the gospel going hand in hand, right? So when we have faith of Jesus, it means not only are we going to obey him, um, but it means that his law, his word, everything is going to shine out of us and show out of us, right? Because of that close relationship that we have with him.
Mm-hmm.
And that will cause us to have an active, living daily experience with Jesus. And I think that's what that truly looks like, to have faith like Jesus, right? Jesus lived by faith, not just had faith and lived, right?
Right.
He combined the two. So maybe some ways that practically looks, it's making Jesus the center of your life. It's letting his faith live in your heart. It's trusting God above all your own trust, obeying even when maybe you don't see the outcome, or maybe when you're thinking it may cost you, but God will provide at the end of the day. And it's just walking with him constantly.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let's end with maybe a little bit of a practical application from today. What is one area of your life where you feel God's inviting you to trust him more deeply? And what is one step you can take to respond in faith?
I think I've talked a bit about the judgment stuff, so
Sure.
I'll bypass that a little bit. I think that uh, the world that we live in isn't very conducive to honoring the Sabbath. I think that a lot of us work full time.
Sure.
Your energy is directed all these different ways, and I think that sometimes honoring the Sabbath can feel like something that you have to do, and it causes a lot of Christians a lot of issues. And I think that for me personally, that's something that God is working on me with, so that I actually understand what rest looks like. I understand what it means to honor Him on the Sabbath. And it's an ongoing process.
Yeah, of course.
And as it is for all of us.
Yeah.
But I think that practically speaking, having a day for Him is the least that you can do.
Yeah. No, of course. And I think Sabbath is one that a lot of people struggle. I even know for myself, like, especially with summer's coming and Friday nights get later and you're trying to get as much done before, and next thing you know, you're in the middle of something and it's past Sabbath and you don't even realize it, right? So I think that's a big one for everyone. And I got some more here. We got, for those listening, maybe it's your relationships, maybe it's your finances, it's a habit you're trying to break, maybe it's a calling that you're just afraid to step into, or maybe it's just in general your future. I know for me right now, that's maybe a big one for me, is just kind of being like, I don't feel like we're keeping up with this and that. And as economic times get harder and things become more unstable and uncertain, I think a lot of people worry about their future, which can lead into different things, like maybe not honoring Sabbath and working through it, or it's maybe taking a job that maybe God doesn't want you to, or something like that, right? But faith grows when we take one step of obedience at a time. And even if it's a small one, if it's in the direction of God's leading, that will help us build our faith. All right. Well, if you haven't already, I invite you to subscribe on our YouTube, Instagram channel, help us grow our platform and just reach other people. And also, you'll get notified about all upcoming episodes. And if you feel passionate about our ministry, we invite you to help us financially to continue to bring you these great episodes every week. The link to Adventist Giving is in our bio. Please use the young adult line. And also, if you have any specific questions and you want to talk to us specifically, click the link in our description to our Google form and fill it out, and we'll try to get back to you. That's all for now. Thanks for joining us. See you next week.